Hello.
How are you, Leon?
I'm very, very well. How are you?
Oh, just wonderful on this cold day.
Where are you?
I'm in Central Oregon, up in the mountains.
Oh, wow. So you're in the middle of nature.
Yes, it's just wonderful. I wish I could pan around, except I have the curtains closed, and show you the beautiful scenery. Mount Bachelor in the distance.
Wow, wow. So what's your name?
Jim Wetherbee.
Jim Wetherbee. So Jim Wetherbee, I clearly don't know who you are, which may be embarrassing soon.
Most people don't know who I am.
Oh, they don't know you. Okay.
No.
So Jim, explain to us, who is Jim?
So I currently have the best job on the planet, where I get to travel around, mostly in the US, although not so much with the COVID pandemic. And I engage with companies who are involved in dangerous work, and I help them with how to predict and prevent the next accident while simultaneously improving productivity. So it's great fun. I get to see companies that are involved in things like construction, dredging in the Atlantic Ocean, aviation, space industry, some medical communities. Just before the last presentation I made just before COVID hit was at Massachusetts General Hospital, and I was 2 feet away from the open chest of a patient who was receiving open heart surgery. And my job was to assist the anesthesia department with the techniques of operating excellence. How can they be most productive and effective working together as a team to not only prevent the accident or the next potential accident, but also be very productive and increase their performance. So I get to work with elite teams and watch how they work and operate and give them assistance and guidance. It's just great fun. I absolutely love it. How about you?
Wow. Wow.
You get to talk to different interesting people too, I guess.
I definitely do. I definitely do. But how did you get into that space? Because that's a very niche, interesting space to be in.
Yeah, well, it's a good choice of words that you used in your question. So how did I get into that space? Well, I have probably the ignominious, if that's the right word, distinction of being involved with 4 major world-shaping tragedies. I was involved in the recovery efforts of the Challenger accident, the Columbia accident, the Texas City disaster, and the Deepwater Horizon accident. So I started my career as an aerospace engineer, and then I didn't want to get a real job when I graduated college, and so I joined the U.S. Navy and learned how to fly on aircraft carriers, did 2 cruises in the Mediterranean, flying mostly the A-7, and then I tested the F-18, which was new at the time, as a naval test pilot. And then I realized I finally had enough experience to apply to the only job I ever really wanted to have, which is to be an astronaut. I applied to NASA, fully expecting to not be selected. It was the only thing I ever wanted to do since I was 10 years old, and was astounded to realize that I was selected and had a great 20-year career at NASA, flew in space 6 times, 5 as a commander. And then after I left NASA, I joined the oil and gas industry and became a safety executive in oil and gas, a large company, and was involved with different businesses around the world trying to help them recover from accidents. And that's how I was involved with the Texas City disaster, an oil spill in Alaska, and then the Deepwater Horizon accident as a member of the investigation team and the technical editor for our internal report. And it suddenly occurred to me that I had sufficient positive material to write a book, which I did write, called Controlling Risk in a Dangerous World, where I make the distinction between managing risk, which is what most companies think about and most people think about, and controlling risk, which is what the frontline operator does. So there's a pretty good distinction, several distinctions between how companies manage risk and how the operator on the front lines, when he or she picks up the toolbox and goes to work, they think about things differently than managing risk. They must control the risk, and that risk changes as they're working. So the rules and policies and procedures are insufficient to help them predict and prevent all accidents. They need a suite of operating techniques, and that's what I teach people about. There's one other point I wanted to make, and that is, because I've had such a wide-ranging career, I have seen not only what works well, and we developed 30 techniques of operating excellence at NASA when I was director of flight crew operations and flying in the space program, but I also learned what I call the 10 adverse characteristics that are in place in any organization before it has a major disaster or minor accidents or a series of accidents. It's always the same 10 things that are going on that help to create the conditions where accidents come about. So I have the positive, what to do to predict and prevent and be productive, and also the negative, what to look for to see if you're headed for a disaster. So that's kind of a answer to your question, which I thought was an interesting question. How did you get into this space?
Do you know what? I feel like you and I could be here for like days. I have so many questions for you, but I have to be calm and ask very specific ones. The first question I have, so you're an astronaut. So the producers know that I love space, right?
Many people do, by the way.
So I look out of the window at night, I see the stars, and I'm like, what on earth is going on? I look at the moon, and I'm like, okay, we call that thing in the sky the moon, but what on earth is the moon? Okay. And I've always wondered, you said you were a commander, which I assume means that you were actually flying the spaceship. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I've always wondered what it feels like to be sitting strapped into this spaceship, right? And controlling the controls to get this spaceship, which I'll say again, up into space. You're sitting there. What does it feel like to be in the controls of a spaceship?
So good question. And many people are interested in that. And they always ask it in sort of that way, what does it feel like? And people really want to know about the feeling. And so I'll go through a little bit of an answer that is not necessarily what you're looking for, but I'll come back and explain the feeling at the end. And so I start by saying, to do the job well, one must be able to compartmentalize and repress any notions of fear. Fear is actually a good emotion to have because it's motivating. Now, worry is not. That's when it's unproductive and you just wallow in the worry and you're afraid you're going to die and those kinds of things. But fear can be a great motivator. So with intense training a year prior to leading up to the flight, and really 14 years before that, we learn as pilots how to compartmentalize, repress the fear, but more positively stated, stay in the moment, stay in the here and now, be able to see everything, sense everything, hear everything, feel everything, respond to the situation, be aware of the situation, respond immediately and make the right decisions. So you learn that through preparation and training. By the time you wake up in the morning, well, let me say the night before your head hits the pillow when you're intending to go to sleep before your first launch attempt, this happened to me. It was pretty eye-watering. I suddenly realized I had just now run out of time to get any smarter, and it's too late to quit. And you're in this, and you have got to figure out a way to get a good night's sleep. So my first thought was, well, this is the only thing I've ever wanted to do since I was 10 years old. And more specifically, what I really wanted to do is not just fly in space, but to physically command a vehicle or pilot a vehicle and dock with a space station. I also had aspirations of walking on the moon or going to Mars, but that didn't happen because we're not there yet. But that thought of this is the only thing I ever wanted to do, helpful but insufficient, because I could still die tomorrow, and that's not what I wanted to do since I was 10 years old. So I had to think more deeply, how am I going to calm down, get a good night's sleep? Because you really have to be performing at peak effectiveness when you're sitting on top of 4.5 million pounds of explosive propellant, 7 million pounds of thrust when it launches. You really got to be doing the right things and thinking the right things. So it took me about 20 minutes of thinking, and I realized this was the importance of the mental attitude in doing any job. You need to have the knowledge, the skill, and the attitude. Most people understand the knowledge and the skill you can develop, but very few people understand the mental attitude required to do a job well. And it occurred to me after 20 minutes, and this has stuck with me throughout my career. Tomorrow morning when I wake up, and I climb on this vehicle and strap in, if bad things start happening and the evil gods of death and destruction conspire with the laws of engineering and physics and the vehicle starts coming apart, I'm going to spend my last seconds of life trying to save in priority order the crew, the vehicle, and the mission. Essentially, I was taking myself out of the equation. Doesn't matter what happens to me. If I can save the crew, I'll die happy. And that actually calmed me down and allowed me to get a good night's sleep, because I knew I had the knowledge, I knew I had the skill, but now I had the right mental attitude to wake up and perform effectively. So now I'm getting to finally answering your question in one direction, and then I'll come around and answer your specific question. What does it feel like? So when you wake up that morning, you really stay in the present. Nothing in the world matters to me other than what I'm doing right now. And so you go get prepared, you take a shower, put on the long underwear, go to the meetings where you learn about, you hear the current status of the vehicle, and you stay in the moment. You don't think about, in 3 hours I might die. You're thinking about the status of the vehicle. They actually give us a weather briefing, a space weather briefing, which is kind of fun. No cosmic storms on the horizon with solar flares, that kind of thing. It's pretty interesting. And then you go to the crew breakfast, and the cameras come in with the photographers for about 3 minutes and 20 seconds and take pictures, and you put on the smile because that's required. And you try to eat breakfast. I didn't really have much of an appetite in the 6 flights that I flew. The original Mercury astronauts would have breakfast of steak and eggs, and I couldn't really do that. I didn't have much of an appetite. But you're really staying in the moment is the point. By the time you get out to the vehicle and you strap in, you pull in the temporal horizon of things that matter. And so now nothing really matters more than about 2 minutes into the future. I don't care what happens 3 minutes from now. I'm concentrating on the checklist, the switches, making sure I do everything right to prepare this vehicle and the crew for launch. By the time the launch countdown gets close to 0, your temporal horizon is only 10 seconds long. I do not care what happens 12 seconds from now. I must anticipate a little bit. So I do anticipate, something that might happen 5 seconds from now. But I'm really staying in the present, and I see everything, I hear everything, I sense everything. It's kind of a Zen thing where you really are in tune with the vehicle. If anything happens, you see it instantly, you make a decision, and you respond. If a crew member says something, you respond. You think about what they're saying and respond. By the time the clock hits 0 and the bolts explode and separate and the solid rocket boosters are ignited and you're suddenly accelerating uphill, and it's not slow and stately like it looks on TV or even if you see it in person, because that's so far away. When you're sitting in the cockpit, it instantly is roaring up into space with the force of 2 times gravity. So I weigh, instead of 195 pound plus an 85 pound suit, I suddenly now weigh 570 pounds instantly going uphill. The tower out your peripheral vision just drops immediately and you are roaring up into space. But you're sensing that, but you're not feeling that. What you have is this intense concentration and rational thinking going on faster than the computers, where you're seeing everything, responding to everything, sensing the engines, looking at the displays, responding to everything. It's just a wonderful feeling. It gives you a huge amount of confidence because you're so in tune with the moment. It isn't until about 5 minutes after we're on orbit, which is 8 minutes and 23 seconds later plus 5, so a total of 13 minutes after you left the launch pad, when you finally come down out of this kind of Zen state of concentration. And my first thought on all 6 missions after being on orbit is, oh man, what a ride. Unbelievable how fast it is. The first scene that I saw that just blew me away was the view of the moon. I'll come back to that in a second, but let me go back and say, you do record the feelings and the sensations you have going uphill, but you don't respond to them. They're being recorded in your mental tape recorder. And I'll tell you, the pressure is just immense. It's the most powerful thing you could ever experience in a straight line environment and come out the other end not being crushed. It's like a bear sitting on your chest, pushing down, trying to collapse the air out of your lungs. And you have to, the technique is to inflate your lungs and breathe using the diaphragm, kind of, because if your lungs ever deflate, it feels like you cannot reinflate them because the pressure is so immense. I used to train by laying on the ground and having my 4-year-old and 3-year-old daughter stand on my chest, and I would try to breathe with them pushing down on my chest. It's hard to describe the immense power that you feel. You almost feel like you'd be halfway to Mars by the time you run out of propellant. It's just an unbelievable feeling. I finally, getting back to the moon, I realized the reason the moon made such an impression on me is because, just like you, I would look out the window when I was growing up and look at the moon, the only object in the sky that doesn't really have a name. We just call it the moon. It's like calling it a rock. Why doesn't it have a name? I've always wondered. But anyway, I realized that was so powerful to me for a couple of reasons physically. Number one, you're looking at the moon against the blackness of space, so it looks much brighter. You're looking at it through the clarity of nothing in between the atmosphere, distorting effects of the atmosphere, so it's much clearer. And it gives you the visual impression that you're very much closer to the moon. It looks huge when you're looking at it. It really isn't. You're only 1/200th of the distance closer to the moon than everyone else on the planet. But the emotional side of why it was so important to me or powerful for me is that I realized the other astronauts had explained and prepared me for everything I would see, with the exception of the view of the moon. They told me the sights that you would see, what it would look like in space, what it would feel like, but nobody ever told me what the moon would look like. So it was the one thing that was new to me that I hadn't vicariously experienced through somebody telling me. So I vowed, after that, my first mission, on all of my commands after that, I would prepare the crew, the rookies on the crew, technically for what they were going to experience, but I would never tell them that what they were going to see or what they were going to feel like, because I wanted to see them experience things for the first time as their eyes got really big as they saw, the view of the Pacific Ocean or the stars at night or the moon. It's just a fantastic experience. I wish everybody could fly in space if they wanted to. So kind of a long answer to your question about what does it feel like. It's mostly a mental thing for a person like me, but you do record and sense the physical aspects of going uphill.
As you were describing that story of sitting in the spaceship and having to be completely in the moment, I've read many books about being in the moment. I've gone on journeys about trying to be in the moment, but that was the best explanation I've ever heard of how one gets to be in the moment. And it was beautiful. It really was. I was completely with you, like 1 billion%. just listening to your story of like being in the moment. And I can imagine, I can only, like, not using my head, using my heart, maybe I can try and feel what it must have actually been like to be in that situation. Right. I've had moments like that, right, where you are completely in the zone and everything is, calm and as it should be within yourself. But to hear it from you, an astronaut who's actually experienced something, your next book should be about being in the moment from the perspective of an astronaut. I'm telling you, the way you explained it was just magnificent.
And the other potentially interesting part would be, how do you develop that ability? And it's not an easy thing. The organizations don't teach it. I haven't found anybody who teaches how to develop that ability to be here now. I learned it through experience in progressively more challenging situations and making mistakes and realizing, I didn't do that right. I better develop the mental discipline to figure out a way to do it better. And eventually it was a 14-year journey where I began to really learn how to stay in the moment, focus on what matters in the here and the now. And I'll tell you what else, Leon, it's helpful on the earth doing just about any job to develop that ability, because you'll work with higher quality, you'll make better decisions. But it also, I think, is, this is kind of cool. To me, it's the secret to longevity. We're all going to die. It doesn't matter how long you live. If you stay in the moment and you experience every single moment, not worry about, I wish it was tomorrow, I can't wait to do whatever it is I'm going to do next week. I experience more, I sense more, I feel more. And then hopefully years from now, when I'm closer to dying, I'm not going to look back and say, I missed a lot. I will have felt like I had a full life, even if I died when I was 30. If I was in the moment and had 30 great years of experiencing the here and the now, it's going to seem like it was a wonderful, productive life. But so that's the key is no matter what you're doing, be here now, experience things now.
So I look forward to your new book coming out about being in the moment. But before that comes out, could you give us one trick to being in the moment? One hack, just one, that someone could easily remember, to how to get themselves back to that place that you described so beautifully when you were the commander of the spaceship.
The one that comes to mind is it's in the middle of the first of the techniques of operating excellence. It's called, what you must do if you're operating in a dangerous environment is to develop and maintain risk awareness. But what does that mean? That's kind of hard to figure out. So I separated into three categories: the past, the present, and the future. In the past is what we call search for vulnerabilities. So there's no automobile, lawnmower, boat, anything I ever tried to operate, airplane, without fully trying to understand, how can the system kill me? So I read accident reports, I read the owner's manual, I talk to designers. I really prepare myself for driving a car or operating a lawn, whatever it is. How can the system kill me? In the present is what we call maintain situational awareness. So I have to sense and be aware of my surroundings. And the third one is the most important, which is called anticipate the changing shape of risk. How does the risk profile change? Even if I'm operating a system in its normal intended way, risk is changing. So let's just take the lawnmower. So I'm mowing the lawn. Because I'm using the lawnmower and I'm moving over the ground, risk is going to change. Like I might suddenly go over a rock in my intended path, and the rock gets spit out by the blades and it hits somebody or hits me in the leg. So if I'm anticipating that, now I go back to the present, I must be more aware of the path that I'm driving, look for rocks, make sure when I sense the vulnerabilities and I know this is possible, I put on the proper equipment. I'm wearing boots that are going to protect my toes. I'm wearing whatever it is. So I'll finally come back and answer the question and say, it's as simple as, and again, any task, you need the knowledge, the skill, and the attitude. So the first is the knowledge. Understand the importance of being in the moment. Develop the skill to be in the moment, and that's nothing more than just practice being in the moment. So decide here. So I'm getting to the technique to try to answer your question. Here's the technique. For the next 20 minutes, decide to yourself, I'm going to stay in the moment. So you set a mental subroutine in your mental processing, your cognitive processing, to stay in the moment. And if I sense that my mind has wandered and I'm starting to think about tomorrow or next week or something other than what I'm sensing right now, realize it, pull myself back and say, oh, I wasn't in the moment. I really have to look for things right now. For example, set a subroutine in your brain to look for everything in this room that's colored red without ever knowing or thinking about what's red. I now have the ability to see and sense things that are red. So set the same kind of subroutine in your brain. Just simply call it stay in the moment, experience everything, see everything. And then try to realize how many things can you see? How many things can you hear? How many things can you feel? What are the sounds I'm hearing in the room? And do that for 20 minutes. When you first do it, on the first day, you'll find that your mind wanders and you have to pull yourself back multiple times. But the more you do it, if you just practice 20 minutes a day for a month, by the end of the month, you're going to be so in the moment for 20 minutes, you'll be able to have that ability to do it for longer periods of time without being distracted. And there's nothing wrong with distractions. Some of it's part of being in the moment. I suddenly hear a sound that wasn't, and I'm wondering, what is that sound? And I'm taking myself out of the now and going over there mentally. What is causing that sound? It's not necessarily bad. But remember to stay here and think about that sound from the perspective of, I'm the operator here. Do I have to do anything because of that sound, or do I just respond and continue on sensing other things because that sound is irrelevant? It really, sorry, I know, Leon, this is a long answer, sorry, but I get passionate about this stuff. It will save your life. So let's say you're driving in a car. Don't think about your arrogant boss or the meeting that you're late for or what you're trying to accomplish when you get to your destination. Think about the fact that you're in the car now and these other drivers are trying to kill me. So my job is to sense where they're going by being in the moment and looking at them and anticipate where can they possibly be, and don't put my car in a place where they can even possibly remotely hit me. There's nothing they can do to kill me because I'm going to avoid every one of them. Now, occasionally you do have to pass somebody and then you're in their blind zone. But before I pass somebody, if it's a 2-lane highway and I'm going to enter their blind zone, I've already known that I can deviate and go laterally if they start to veer into my lane because they don't see me. So I already have a plan of attack on how I'm going to avoid the accident. You can only do that if you're staying in the moment. And so it's a very powerful tool if you can develop it. So to sum up, I guess, practice 20 minutes a day for a month on staying in the moment, and you'll find you're not good at it initially, and you'll get better and better at it.
I ride a moped, and when I'm riding the moped, I have a rule, and the rule is that I am entirely responsible for everything that happens.
Yep.
If someone goes through a red light, I am responsible for that person going through the red light because I'm the one on the moped and I'm the one that's going to be hit. So everything is on me, and it becomes a meditation. I remember I was riding the bike up near my house, and there was a crazy guy behind me that was, coming up behind me and peeping at me and all this kind of stuff. And my first reaction was to get angry. My second reaction was, no, you are on this bike. You chose to be on this bike. It is your responsibility to move to the right so that this guy who's having a bad day can move on, because you are the one who is on the moped. Yep. And it is a meditation. So the next time I get on my moped, I am going to literally pretend that I am on a rocket ship on the way to the space station, and get my level of being in the moment to the level that you have experienced 6 times or however many times you've done it. Yeah. So I think it was simple, 20 minutes, concentrate on the tree, concentrate on the room, concentrate on being here right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great feeling when you can sort of master that technique. It gives you much more ability to respond correctly. It's just wonderful. And then you can start to see when other people are in the moment or not. You can sense whether or not they're really in the moment or they're wandering, thinking about something else. It's kind of neat. That's how elite operators perform. And you can watch teams. So back to the anesthesia group in Massachusetts General Hospital. I mean, it was just wonderful. They had, some of it was active, audible communication, but some of their communication was nonverbal. And you could watch and see them communicating with each other without saying anything. I mean, it's just wonderful when you have that ability. And they go into that, and they're getting ready to induce the patient, which is their moment of truth. Another technique they use is it's kind of similar. Eliminate all distractions, but think to yourself, what are the only things that matter as we're about to induce this patient? Well, do I have the right drug? Do I have the right dosage? Is this the right patient? Is everything set and ready to go? Do we have somebody monitoring as we're inducing and anticipating that something's going to happen? Don't wait to respond when the patient starts to crater. Anticipate the subtle changes that indicate impending cratering of the patient and do something about it before it's too late. So, yeah, the ability to stay in the present and be here now. It sounds like you really have it already somewhat mastered. If you can do that on a moped, you can do it anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the privilege of going on many adventures. I haven't had the privilege of going to space, one day maybe. And in the adventures I've done, I'm not sure what you know about me, but I basically circumnavigated the world relying entirely on the kindness of strangers in a 40-year-old yellow motorcycle. And then I did a trip from Alaska to Argentina in a 50-year-old yellow Beetle. And I've done many other things. And the reason why I'm sharing that with you is because there are times when you're on the road where you have to be so focused. You are in a snowstorm. You're in a 50-year-old car with crappy brakes. And you have to be so present. I remember I took a vintage taxi from Times Square to the Hollywood sign, giving free cab rides to people. I arrived in Colorado in an epic snowstorm. The battery started to wear out. The lights started to dim. It was in the middle of the night. There was so much snow. And the way that I was navigating was through one line on the freeway. So one white line. And the level of focus that I needed to be in, the level of present momentness that I needed to be in to stay alive, really, because there were trucks coming by, my lights were going out, was something that, as I sit here and say this to you, maybe is somewhat relatable to you being on that spaceship, right? You have to be, I even remember it now, I feel it, that one line, one white line, next white line, and that enabled me to go straight. And had I not been in the moment, it just would have all fallen apart. The same as you. If you're not in the moment when you're guiding that spaceship, there's going to be a bit of a problem. If the doctor isn't in the moment when they're looking after that patient, it's not going to end well. If Leon is not in the moment when his car is about to stall in the middle of a snowstorm on the freeway, there's going to be a problem. So it's so interesting. It's like sometimes people say to me, why do you do these podcasts? Like, what?
No, so my question is going to be not why do you do these podcasts, but why did you choose to do that in Colorado, or why did you choose to drive down to Argentina in a 50-year-old yellow Beetle? What is it about that experience that you anticipated that caused you to do that? And did you fulfill your expectations?
The most alive, that's a great question. The most alive that I have felt is when I have been on an adventure, doing something greater than myself, and focusing all my attention, my energy, my soul, my heart on what I'm doing. Yeah. It's like I feel completely alive. And I think that what you're saying is that when you were doing what you were doing with the space stuff, you, in that moment of liftoff, let's say, which is the story you mentioned to me, maybe you didn't say this, but I think this is what you were saying, that you felt completely alive. You couldn't possibly feel any more alive. And that is why I did and I do what I do, because I want to feel as alive as I possibly can. Now, you don't have to take a spaceship and go to space to feel alive. You don't have to do an Alaskan journey in a 50-year-old Beetle to feel alive. You can go outside, sit next to a tree, and commune with the tree, and you will feel alive. You can have a conversation with a former astronaut who explains his adventures, and you can feel alive.
So, great answer, and I love your motivation. I would very subtly change it if I were to explain and answer that same question. And I actually wrote a very small section in the introduction of my book where I distinguish between the motivations of base jumpers, for example, or people who are adrenaline junkies who like risk. And I'm not saying you're in that category, and astronauts. And the subtle way I might change it, and maybe we're saying the same thing, tell me if we are. To me, it seems a little bit different. With me, it's not, the feeling alive is a great benefit of doing it. But my motivation has always been to be in control, to control things. I've loved dangerous situations, but it's not the danger I like. In fact, I don't like the feeling of adrenaline when things start to get out of control. With me, it's about how can I control not only the external environment through my actions, but more importantly, how can I control my mental processes and respond correctly and be in control of myself and the environment and come out alive? I don't want to get close to death. I want to stay as far away from death as possible, but I want to control systems and outcomes and my own mental processes. That's what motivates me. I don't know why I have that motivation. An added benefit is I feel alive when I'm doing it or when I'm done doing it. When I'm in the moment, I don't really feel alive. I feel like I'm in tune with the system and in tune with the crew, and we're operating in synchronicity. And that's the part I love, is the process of being in control. I don't know if that's similar to what you were saying or different.
Yes, it's similar in the sense that for me, when I am one with everything, let's say, and I am super laser focused, there is an essence of control. But for me, it's more, I am one with the highest capacity of my human, my abilities as a human.
Yeah.
And I am functioning at a level that is so much higher than my normal everyday life.
Yeah.
And when I'm functioning at that level, it's really, and I talk for myself here, it's really a spiritual moment.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I don't want bad things to happen either, right? And sometimes you can get to that tipping point where you're not in a spiritual moment anymore and you're in like, oh shit moment, right? And I don't want to get to that moment. I'd rather stay in that zone of presence and focus and not tip over to the oh shit moment.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So you're actualizing your greatest potential, knowing that there's room to improve and get even better the next day. I've always thought the leader is the best when he or she retires, because they've at the end of a long, productive career, and they've learned everything they have. And I think the day we die will be the best that we ever are, if we stay in this journey of always trying to improve and do better. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the cool part about the fact that God gave us the privilege of being alive on this planet, is we get to choose our destiny and choose how well we do at the game of life.
Wow. Goosebumps. You know, on some days I would say that there's no bettering what you just said, and let's end the podcast now. But I have one more question, which I need to ask you.
Okay.
I remember the Challenger disaster, 1986. I was 9 years old. I remember the images. I remember it, and it was it's like it stamped into my psyche, as I'm sure it stamped into the psyche of many people who watched it. But for someone like you, that was intimately involved in it, how did that change you?
So I'll preface my answer by saying that by that time in my career, and I was 30 some years old, I had just become an astronaut 2 years earlier. I had seen an awful lot of death and destruction in the U.S. Navy. We lost 7 pilots and 7 accidents in 7 months back in the late 70s, early 80s. And that was considered a successful cruise. But eventually we figured out in the Navy we had to do better. We had to develop the techniques of operating excellence to learn how to not kill so many people. I also had experienced, I have a theory, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I have a theory that if you're a person who has experienced a lot of death and destruction and seen a lot, one accident will stand out more than others. And this particular accident that I experienced was not even someone who was close to me, but it affected me because this person died doing something that was not a very important mission. He was in a helicopter and they had an accident and he perished. Wasn't even a really close friend of mine, but it really caused me to think, do I really want to be in this business? And I spent 3 days wallowing in that self-analysis and discussion, and why am I doing this? And, it can result in senseless tragedy. But after 3 days, a friend of mine looked at me and he said, look, you just got to ask yourself one question. Do you want to be in this business or not? If you do, apply yourself, become the best you can be. Don't worry about that accident. Decide this is what you want to do and get after it. And that kind of woke me up to the fact that, well, even though the accident was a tragedy, and all accidents are tragedies, what can I do to prevent future ones? How can I improve my performance? Do I really want to do this? Yes, I do. And so once I, went over that or through that emotional hurdle or whatever, it became a matter of focusing on the task and not worrying about things that I don't have control of, which is the past, which is accidents. So when Challenger exploded, My job down at the Cape, that was the first launch I ever saw in person. My job was fulfilled at 9 minutes before liftoff. Once they came out of the 9-minute hold, I had no more responsibility. So I was able to walk outside the blockhouse and watch the vehicle climbing. But as soon as it came apart, my job then became to get the chief of the astronaut office driving back to the crew quarters to where the bosses were making decisions and sending people to various places. So I didn't have the luxury or the ability to think about what must have been like for the crew. My job was to get the chief to the bosses. And I did that the best way I could. And we had a police escort, and the guy was going 90 miles an hour down the highway. And there was a traffic jam up ahead. So he slowed down to 60. I was in a trailing rental car driving the chief of the office. And the police officer saw that he wasn't going to get through because there was a traffic jam. So he slowed down to 60, went into the grass and dirt median, grass and dirt and rocks and stuff flying by. And I followed him. And he entered the northbound lane, heading southbound, where there were fewer cars going that way, picked it back up to 95 miles an hour. So now we had a situation where there's cars coming 55 miles an hour this way. So we had a closing velocity of 145 miles an hour. And the cop is weaving in and out of this traffic. And I'm driving the chief of the office to get to where the bosses are. And of course, I stayed in the moment. What I learned that day was very helpful. It's almost exactly like in Hollywood movies when you see the protagonist weaving in and out of traffic and everybody else, and you're wondering, how is he doing that? Well, it turns out people who are faced in that situation, the opposing drivers, typically their eyes get real big and they freeze. They stay in their lane. They don't maneuver. So we had the ability to maneuver in and out of them. And I got the chief to the boss, and the boss was making decisions, and he directed me to go back into the helicopter out to the wreckage site and report what I saw. But the whole time I was doing that, with the experience, the tragic experience of experienced so many other accidents, was I stayed in the moment and I did my job, and I didn't think about the crew. It isn't until much later, again, when you're trying to go to sleep, that you have the ability to think about, oh man, what must it have been like for my 7 friends who knew they had seconds to live in impending tragedy. And that makes it really hard to sleep. But when you're awake and you're functioning, you do the job. And I watched, by the way, I'm finally getting to maybe a point in this answer. I watched bosses at NASA who did it really well. And I watched leaders who weren't as good and weren't making good decisions. And I remembered that 19 years later, when I was tasked with becoming the search director, the operational search director for the Columbia crew. Essentially, no rules, unlimited budget, Wetherbee, go find your 7 friends. And I was responsible for coordinating the effort of 45 different companies and 2,000 people to go find the human remains of the Columbia crew. I remembered the experience from years earlier. I watched good leaders and I watched not so good leaders, and I knew what to do to effectively lead a team to go find the human remains and recover them with dignity, honor, and reverence. And all those words matter. And so we did that job, and you stay in the moment. It isn't until you have the time to think about it when the reality of the situation hits. But when you're doing the job, you just stay focused and you do the job the best you can. And, my hope is someday in the next life, I'm able to see the Columbia crew and tell them we did the best we could. And thank them for inspiring the rest of us to continue the journey of exploration.
Well, I will tell you that you have inspired me today. And it means a lot when people agree to come onto this podcast, to share their hearts, to share their truth, to share their pain, to share their love. And I will never forget your explanation of what it feels like to drive a spaceship and to be in the moment. And the next time I need to be in the moment, without a shadow of a doubt, your words will come to me. And it's been an honor. It's been an honor. And I don't say that lightly. In fact, I'm not sure I've said it before, but it's been an honor. And I truly appreciate the conversation.
Well, I appreciate it. It's fun talking to somebody who gets it. You clearly do have the ability to master your surroundings and your internal mental processes. So it's fun talking to people who really understand, and you do have the experience. And it seems like you really have been a pilot of a space vehicle in your experiences here on Earth.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, and I very much look forward to reading your new book, and your current book, of course.
Thanks, Leon. I appreciate it.
Hello, everyone. It's Leon here, aka the Kindness Guy. If you like my videos, which I hope you do, don't forget to press the subscribe button and also to ring the little bell so that the notifications notify you that I have